has been brought to you by the letter H.
Okay, we are up to the letter H, and around here, H stands for historical archaeology. Now, when I say historical archaeology, I'm using a very basic and very inclusive definition, which essentially means archaeology in historic times, meaning written history. So, any archaeology done after prehistory when you have writing available. Now, this raises the obvious problem, which is that writing came about in different places at different times. And in fact, in many places, it came and went and came back again. Think Britain. The Iron Age population of Britain was not lettered. The Romans came in, they brought writing. Roman Britain has a lot of written sources. Then the Romans left in the 5th century. And once again, you then have a lack of writing, the Dark Ages. It survived in some pockets, but very, very little of it. In fact, I think from the first half of the 500s with Gildas, way up until 730 with Bede, there's no written source of any length from Britain. That's 200 years. And of course, writing did eventually return to Britain, as I know all too well, given the number of assignments I have coming due. So what I'm concerned about here is the process of archaeology. That would be historical archaeology, which is the process of doing archaeology aided by text, by writing, versus prehistoric archaeology, which is without writing. And just FYI, there are a lot of people who consider a different definition, a narrower definition of historical archaeology. They'll say something like archaeology of the colonial and post-colonial era, or everything Roman and thereafter. To me, that seems a little bit arbitrary and a little bit too Western-centric. The Roman Empire had nothing to do with China, for example. So I'm taking a more inclusive definition. And I know what you're probably thinking at this point, which is, historic sources, writing plus archaeology. What could be more powerful than that in getting a really full version of what happened in the past? And theoretically, I say, sure, but practically,
we've got issues.
You see, there is such a bias towards the written word, and though I'm a total history buff and I love reading, as Winston Churchill didn't actually say, history is written by the victors. And it's true anyway, even though he didn't actually say it. If you look at history, so much of it was written in a distorted way as to twist what really happened, demonize or erase certain people for the benefit of those in power. Think about Elizabeth I, someone who has been treated very well by history. She was the queen who presided over a golden age. She was Gloriana, the Virgin Queen.
Are you a virgin?
Wrong!
Actually, this is an orthodoxy Elizabeth herself established and ruthlessly enforced during her reign, aided, of course, by a network of spies and secret police, writers you may have heard of, and artists. Check out this charming family portrait of Elizabeth's family. In the center, you have her father, King Henry VIII. And to the left, that dark-looking woman in the background, well, that's her sister Mary, who preceded her on the throne. And right next to Mary is Mars, the god of war, the Roman god of war. So this presents Mary, who didn't get along with Elizabeth very well, as the past, as dark, as ushering in a period of war, and Elizabeth, on the other hand, on the right, resplendent in her white gown, is sort of a Virgin Mary-like figure, Gloriana embodied. And by the way, how do we know her sister Mary today? Bloody Mary. And do you think that's an accident? No. The victors are the ones who write the history. And, Elizabeth is an example of that. And I'm not going to get too deep into it because it's contentious and this is not a history channel, but There is a whole cottage industry nowadays of academic and professional historians who basically shit on Elizabeth quite a bit. I'll put some good links below in the show notes. Perhaps less pernicious, but far more commonplace, was simple bias. And we're going to stick to Britain because that's something that I happen to know very well, but you can find examples of this bias everywhere in history. So, the first 500 years after the Roman Empire, pretty much all written history was coming from monks. These monks were increasingly associated with abbeys and monasteries that were under royal and noble patronage. So, what did these guys care about? And what did they write about? They wrote about hairstyles, the date of Easter,
Easter Bunny taken to the streets and getting into a fight.
what their royal sugar daddies were doing, what the frickin' geese were doing.
Wash this!
Among other important things. And what didn't they care so much about? The huge portion of society that was enslaved to some degree or another, the Welsh, women. You get the picture. So categories of people like these latter groups don't feature very large in history, and when they do, it's often not in a very positive light. So not surprisingly, in archaeology, there have been subfields that have sprung up around these very areas. For example, the archaeology of enslavement. This is a recent and very positive development that you can see happening all over the southeastern United States at plantations, where the focus is much more on the people who are doing all the work and feeding everyone than their wealthy masters. Or indigenous archaeology. Archaeologies of colonized people and minority people all over the world, and also feminist archaeology, which is now an established subdiscipline within archaeology in departments all over the world. And if you think this doesn't apply to modern times with its high rates of literacy and multiple forms of media, think again. The next time you're in New York City, I'd highly recommend you visit the New York City Tenement Museum on the Lower East Side, which details the lives of poor immigrants in this neighborhood. No, long before her. We're talking about the late 19th century and early 20th century. And what happened was when this building became vacant, they opened up the walls, and we learned really a lot about the daily lives and minutiae of generations of these immigrants. Now, I know what you're thinking. I know about the tenements in New York and the poor immigrants that passed through there. I read about that in my history book. And to that I would say, do we really? I mean, how much of that history book was written by them? Second, even if we have a bunch of their writings, did they really focus that much on their daily lives? Probably not. Just like those medieval monks, most people tend to write about things they think are important, their aspirations, their hopes and their dreams, not necessarily their everyday humdrum doings. And third and finally, the written word is certainly a powerful medium, but it doesn't give you the whole story. Experiencing something by seeing it and touching it, which is what you get with archaeology, brings it to a whole different level of understanding. And seeing that angle actually helps you to humanize someone, people who are distant in space and time. And that, I continue to maintain, is one of archaeology's core strengths and sort of its secret superpower. Because after all, that's right, Madonna, you got it right this time. So what are the takeaways from this? In fact, history and archaeology can play very well together and really be a 1 + 1 = 3 situation if we use it properly to aid our interpretations. But we have to check history for its biases and omissions and not let it predetermine our interpretations too much. We have to remember that
just because it's in print doesn't mean it's the gospel.
Why, thanks, Michael. Wow, we're getting a lot of wisdom from 1980s pop stars today. But anyway, the point is this. If we accept history as basically the truth and allow that to shape our archaeology research agendas, we're going to miss out on whole storylines and groups of people. We may even be misdirected by deliberate lies and obfuscations. And at very least, we're going to lose some of the power we could otherwise get from all of the sensory experiences that archaeology provides off of the page. A good example of how this can be done well, and also the pitfalls of historical archaeology, see my site visit to Masada. From there, we can see that even the Bible can be a good companion to archaeology if used with a skeptical eye and without an ideological agenda. A good lesson from this is that if we subordinate archaeology to history or let history totally guide archaeology, we're going to wind up with mistakes, omissions, and biases. History and archaeology are kind of like dancing partners. And if done right, it can be a beautiful thing. Hey, if you like what you heard, give me that thumbs up below, hit that bell to subscribe, or if you want to support more independent archaeology content, consider contributing to my Patreon, where you can enjoy some exclusive members-only benefits and other goodies. Until the next dig.